No, you can't.
Okay, hi, and this is Nick Cody from Green Eyed Records. I'm today with Harry Orme, singer-songwriter, jazz player, session musician. How would you best describe yourself?
You've done a good job, man. I think, yeah. Jack of all trades, is that on offer to describe
Jack
myself
of all
as?
trades. Yeah. And you're known for writing your own material, but you're also known extensively for playing in different jazz ensembles. So what first got you interested in jazz?
I got into it a really stupid way, which was that I'd been playing all sorts of, grew up playing all sorts of rock music mostly, and then bits of singer-songwriter stuff, and at some point it got into my head that jazz was hard. And so I thought, well, I need to kind of not conquer it, but you know what I mean? It's like especially when you're young, maybe if someone shows you a mountain, you think, oh, I've got to climb it. So I got into it a very silly way. Having said that, my folks were always really into like Ella Fitzgerald, especially. So I loved a lot of that side of the music, and then getting into all of the rest of it, you know, bebop and hard bop and all of the contemporary stuff, that kind of came later with coming up here to study it. And now it's, yeah, probably in terms of like proportion of time, most of what I do, I think.
So when you say coming up, where did you come up from?
So I grew up in the West Midlands. I went to school in a town called Evesham, which is the asparagus capital of the country, I believe. This is our claim to fame. But so there's a lot of asparagus, but not that many folk playing. I mean, there's some great musicians down there, but I wanted to get up to a city, big city like Leeds.
No sign of a Brummie or Wolverhampton accent either.
No, it's all messed up, man. I spent too much time hanging out with. I think all of the folk that I was living with were all from different places. So there was a Brummie guy, and there was a guy from the northeast. Some guys from like the East Midlands. There was a Glaswegian who we were hanging out with a lot. So it's all there's some sort of all of the colours have just turned into brown, I think, and an indecipherable, untraceable brown.
And in terms of jazz musicians, who are the ones that really have been your main inspirations so far?
Oh man, so the figure who looms the largest for me is probably Julian Large. Currently is the guy who I keep coming back to. Saw him for the first time earlier this year. Might be my favourite gig that I've ever been to, as we were talking about the other day. But also, I mean, obviously, Wes Montgomery, we did a project earlier this year where for his centenary we took down a couple of sets of his tunes and worked those up with a quartet. That was great. Kurt Rosenwinkel, specifically the trio records. There's a record called Reflections. There's a record called East Coast Love Affair. Those are massive. Gilad Hexelman's first record, which is not on streaming, but I would urge anyone to go out and buy it. It's on a label run by Smalls Jazz Club in New York. So you can't stream it, but you can buy it. And it just sort of changed the way that I was thinking about what the guitar could do when I heard it. That's really beautiful. I'm sure I'm missing loads. Jim Hall, the record called The Bridge by Sonny Rollins. That was maybe the model for me. A fellow from where I'm from called Joe Archer was my first jazz guitar teacher. And when I first started taking lessons with him, he was like, so are you listening to any of this music? And I was like, oh no, not really. I've just heard that it's hard. And he was like, right, okay, so you're going to go away and you're going to listen to Bright Size Life by Pat Metheny and The Bridge by Sonny Rollins for Jim Hall's playing. And Bright Size Life, I've never managed to get into the 80s aesthetic, really. I mean, Metheny's obviously like a genius and kind of untouchable in a lot of ways, but aesthetically it's not quite what I'm going for. But Jim Hall on that record, The Bridge, untouchable. Yeah, great.
And I know you teach guitar as well as transcribe as well. So what's your best advice for people wanting to start out either as singer-songwriters or as, say, guitarists?
Sure. It's sort of, obviously you try and tailor anything that you're telling your students to the student. But the advice that I'm most tempted to give those two different groups of people are often sort of opposite sets of advice. They're like the sort of two sides of the coin. So when I'm teaching instrumentalists, especially people involved in improvised music or jazz, I'll want to try and key them into, like, don't just think about the information, really get back in touch with the sound, because we're told a lot to learn these different scales, these different exercises, the different sort of improvisatory techniques. And when we're thinking about all of that information, we can sort of lose touch with how does it actually sound to me? Like, is there any emotive content present? So that's the thing that I end up telling a lot of young kind of improvising musicians who come to me. And then for singer-songwriters, often it's the opposite. They're really in touch with the emotive content of what they're doing, but they might not have been given a language to talk about or think about harmony or rhythm or like new things that they could, strategies for finding new things to do harmonically or rhythmically or those kind of things.
And what would be a non-musical inspiration for you in terms of your creativity?
Oh, sure. You know, it used to be that when I was 21 and I first started writing songs, it was all of those American post-war authors, like all of the beat poets, lots of Bukowski. Now I'm a little more, there's some Bukowski that I'm much queasier about than I was 10 years ago, which is obviously not to say that he wasn't a great writer, but he's not necessarily the model that you want to be using for anything, potentially. But so what would a non-musical inspiration for me be now? I mean, you know, the thing that I think about most actually is cinema, probably. Like I think about the way that a shot is paced or a scene is paced. And in terms of making records, actually, a breakthrough that I had with recording the guitar was I used to think that it was about getting this really sort of faithful capture of what you're hearing in a room. And then someone switched me onto the idea of like, A, that's not really possible because you've got mics instead of ears in front of you recording. And secondly, that for a film, say, you wouldn't just take a theatre show and stick a camera in front of it in one of the seats and be like, that's the film. It's all about pushing in and like guiding the audience towards the details that you want them to be picking up on. And so I think that would be it for me at the moment.
And if people want to find out about Harry Orme, whether to hire him, admire him, worship him, listen to him, watch him, what's the best place to go?
I'm on all of the socials, and my handle I think is uniform across all of them. It's HGS Orme. But if you type Harry Orme, O-R-M-E, and look for a guy playing the guitar, that'll be me. And my website is harryorme.com, and you got in early with that one. Yeah, you can get in touch with me through that.
Well, thank you so much for dropping by and talking to us.
Pleasure, not at all. Thanks, man.